All right. So, what we're going to talk about today is something called the cell cycle. And it's basically the circle of life for a cell. So, we're just going to get right into the note and we're going to call it, like I said, cell cycle. So, at the end of the last lesson, I was talking about how once you have a new cell, that cell will divide to become two, to become four, et cetera, and multiply until you get a multicellular complex organism. That's the case with us. There are life forms that are just one cell singular, and they spend their whole life as that one cell. So that cell at some point came from the division of another cell. So no matter if you're a life form that is only one cell big, or you're a big complicated organism with multiple types of cells and so many of them, all life comes from other cells. So we are just going to draw this. There's sort of like a circle picture that goes with this, and it's not going to be a perfect circle, but it'll just get the point across, and you're going to make it big enough so that you can write inside it. So maybe take the size of mine to kind of guide you. Well, good enough. Okay, so we need to slice this up sort of like a pie, and it doesn't have to be to scale, but I'm just going to head towards the center, and I'm going to take a sliver out like this. Okay, and it's not going to be to scale, but I'm going to write in the numbers. So we're going to treat this like this is like times zero. Oh, sorry. This is like times zero right here. So this cell has just come into being because it divided from another cell. And then it's going to go through the process of its lifespan, and eventually it's going to die. Um, and so there's this big stage here, which takes up 90% of the cell's life, and that is called interphase. So we're going to write, I'm going to do like an arrow thing here. From here all the way around to here, this is called interphase. INTERPHASE. We have a different series of phases we're going to look at. An interphase for most cells takes up 90% of its lifespan. So the entire time the cell is alive, obviously the vast majority of it is spent in interphase. An interphase is just the stage of life where the cell is going about doing its job. So depending on what kind of cell it is, it's going to have a different role to play if we have a multicellular organism. So an organism made of lots of different cells and therefore different cell types. So if it's a muscle cell, it's doing its like stretching, contracting. If it's a nerve cell, it's sending electrical impulses to message across the body. If it's a skin cell, then it's creating that outer layer and just doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, now we can divide interphase into sort of three main segments. So, three significant periods of time while the cell is living its life and doing its job. So, I am going to introduce that idea to you. So, I'm just going to do some dash lines here. And once again, it doesn't really matter how much time you know about each of these stages within interphase, but I'm just going to introduce to you what happens. So the cell comes into being. Usually the first thing that happens is that cell will grow a little bit. So this is the first stage of growth. Okay, it can still do everything it's supposed to do, but is expanding and developing and that kind of thing. In this phase here, or stage of interphase here, we call it synthesis. Because what is happening is this cell knows that its life is going, well, it doesn't know, it doesn't think, but at some point the cell is going to die and therefore a replacement is needed. Before the cell can make a sufficient replacement, it has to make a second copy of all of its information, and its information is in the DNA molecules. So it has to make a second copy of all of the information in the nucleus. And then when it dies, what it really does is divide into two cells that then carry on. So this stage, okay, in this stage, what's happening is the DNA is copied. So now you actually have two complete sets of DNA, and that's in preparation for the end of the life cycle here. Then you have some more growth. Well, like I said, the cell is carrying on all its normal functioning. This piece here is the process of one cell becoming two and that division. So the end of this cell, and then sort of like the birth of two new cells that come from what was here before. And it has multiple phases. So this part here, and maybe I'm just trying to think how much space I have. Let's label it. Actually, let's label the different pieces first. So I need to have 1, 2, 3 lines in there because there's 4 phases to division. So this process of, maybe I can write over both these. So this is cell division. And I'm going to put in brackets a new term, mitosis. M-I-T-O-S-I-S. Okay, is what we call this collection of phases that the cell goes through when it ends this one and becomes 2 new ones. So we're not going to talk about what happens in these phases today. I'm going to save that for next week, but I am going to introduce the terms. So interphase is just the regular functioning of the cell. The only thing really significant here to understand is obviously is that it grows somewhat from when it was first came into being, and then it copies the DNA in preparation for when it will divide and provide 2 new cells. So this first one, and I would write it in here if I had enough space, but I don't. So this first phase here, as we're getting now ready to divide, is called prophase. P-R-O, phase. The second one is called metaphase, M-E-T-A, phase. And then I'm just going to go to the top for space. The third phase in the process of division is called anaphase, A-N-A. And the last one, telo or telo, T-E-L-O, phase. Okay, and then I've really scrunched myself here, but right here where we started the beginning of this cell, okay, at the end of telophase, and then there's another little thing called cytokinesis we're going to write in here. Let's do this. Make it come over here. Okay, right between here and here, should say one more sliver, is cytokinesis, C-Y-T-O-K-I-N-E-S-I-S. Kinesis, whenever you see that word, is usually talking about some kind of movement. Cyto, like cytoplasm. So this is going to be the splitting up of all of the things, including the cytoplasm that were in the original cell, so that I can share them amongst the 2 new cells. So after that, when cytokinesis is over, we have 2 new cells. And then each of those will enter their own cell cycle. So those 2 cells are now independent little living pieces that will have a role to play, and then at some point go through the process of dividing themselves and leaving behind new cells in their place. Okay, so maybe we will, because I have some space over here right after this. We have 2 new cells, and they are identical to the original. A little asterisk there, identical to original cell. So they are, in terms of, like I said, the DNA, unless there was a mistake, which does happen, but overall, sometimes those mistakes aren't significant to cause a problem. but in the most way trying not to make mistakes, that you will replace what you had with two new ones that can grow and live, etc., etc. Okay. So when I come back to the next lesson, I will talk about what happens within each of these and a little bit more about this process of cell dividing from 1 to 2, and talk about some scenarios of why it's important for cells to divide and when a life form would be relying on cell division for some reason. Okay. All right. So then the only thing I want to add to this is to talk a little bit about cancer. And I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail. I'm just going to introduce the concept because it is connected to cell division. So as you know, cancer is an incredibly common disease that occurs. The reason for why it occurs varies. It could be as a result of your genetics. It could be as a result of something that you've been exposed to in your environment. It could be a combination of both of those things. It could be a virus potentially, like HPV. Not that there's that many like that, but that's one example. So there's a whole host of different reasons. It could be sun exposure, which would be an environment one, or we could talk about chemical one. So there's a lot of reasons for why this might happen, and sometimes it might feel like you just can't identify why it happened. So essentially, what cancer is when a cell loses control of its division. So a cell continues to divide out of control. So how it's different from what you see here is it doesn't actually spend much time in interphase. The cell comes into being if it's a cancerous cell, and it never actually takes on a cell type function. It just moves really quickly into dividing again. And then those are cancerous cells that, once again, don't really spend any time in fulfilling a function. Moves right into dividing again. So what happens is, for whatever reason, some kind of problem occurs in the DNA, which means the cell can't control this, and it divides, and then it divides again, and then it divides again, and it just keeps happening. And that becomes problematic. The cells are alive, and so they are taking resources from your body. They require oxygen delivery and food and all of these components. So they're demanding, and they start to pile up. And that's eventually what you would that's what your tumor is. There's different types of tumors. The malignant kind means that there are cells that are breaking off from that original tumor or mass, and they are moving around your body, and they're landing in other places and causing the same thing to happen at a new site. So that's maybe when you go from having I don't know, like a bone cancer, to having cancer in your liver, to having cancer in your brain, to having multiple sites where the cancer is showing up. I'm not going to talk a lot about stages or anything like that, but I think probably enough of us know either someone who has or is currently suffering from cancer, what that can look like. And obviously, the earlier that you are aware that this is happening in your body, the better your chances of success typically in fighting off that cancer. And different ones are more aggressive than others. So they do this more quickly, and they spread more quickly, cause more destruction more quickly than others. So to go from this, if you can just basically understand that's what cancer is. So in theory, it can happen in any cell that it loses its control. And then you just have this living mass that starts to take over. Sometimes you don't notice for a while, and that mass might become obvious to you only once there's pain or something feels like it's wrong. Could be because by the time you know it's there, it's taken up a large portion of an organ, and that organ's not doing its job anymore because these cells aren't doing their regular cell jobs. It could be because the mass has gotten big and it's pushing on something else. So there's lots of pieces to it there. How we tend to treat it, and I'm just going to do a really quick, superficial, skimming the surface of treatment. The whole idea is to kill off that cell, those group of cells, or get them out so that they're not there anymore. And so one of the things that is common to do is surgery. So that you go in and you physically try to remove all of the cancerous cells that are there. Cut out the tumor and make sure you get all the ones around it that could also be cancerous, so that what is left behind are normal functioning cells in control of their division that will spend a lot of time in interphase doing what that cell is supposed to be doing, developing into the cell type, and then dividing when it's appropriate. Another thing that you can do is chemotherapy. So this is a chemical treatment. That's what this is about. And it usually works throughout your whole body. So these chemicals are introduced to you. What these chemicals do is they kill rapidly dividing cells. So it targets any cell in your body that has a rapid rate of division, so that divides quickly. So that the thought there is, and how it works is that it's going to go in and it's going to target the cancer cells because they're rapidly dividing, and it's going to kill them. It will take a toll on you. It can make you feel quite sick because of the fact there's harm coming to your body. But the idea is when the treatment is over, then your body is able to recover, and obviously you're in a better position than before you had the treatment. In the process of killing the cancerous cells, because all it is specific to is ones that are dividing quickly, it will kill other cells that naturally divide quite rapidly. So that would be like the hair follicles that are the source of your hair. So that's why people typically tend to lose their hair when they're taking chemotherapy, because those cells are destroyed as well. Lining of your stomach is another place where your cells divide quite rapidly. So, you can, just because you're taking basically a poison in, you're going to feel sick as well. There might be a lot of vomiting and illness and stuff like that. There's definitely weakness that comes with it. But there are other things that your body will sort of have to go through in the process of having your chemotherapy work to kill off your cancer. Another one is radiation therapy. And radiation, like surgery, is a little more targeted to one site. This has to travel pretty much through your whole body, although I'm not up to date on all the new cancer treatments. But I know obviously there's a lot of funding, a lot of money, a lot of research, and a lot of good development in terms of what they can do to treat cancer. So radiation therapy, we've talked about this before, actually starting in optics. The idea is you can use this element of the EM spectrum, and you can focus it in on cells that you want to kill, and then put enough of that type of radiation in the cell that it will die. And so you'll see sometimes a combination of this. They might do surgery, they might do radiation in that area as well to make sure they get all those cells. There might be chemotherapy treatments involved. So it just depends on the complexity and the type, and whatever your physicians and your team think is the best course of action for you. So in all of these cases, though, the main idea obviously is to kill the cancer cells or to physically remove them from you. Okay. So I am going to attach, not too much today, I'm going to attach, I think, two things, which are more for interest's sake, and kind of maybe connect what's on the page here to some people and some, I don't know, some give you a little bit more depth to it. So one of them is an article that was just in the newspaper yesterday about a couple who have both developed the same rare form of cancer and are going through treatment for it. It's really short, but it's also connected to the day before's lesson because it's a type of leukemia. And leukemia is a type of cancer that develops in the bone marrow and affects your ability to make blood and things like that. So it talks about stem cell donations just like we talked about the other day. So what would happen here is the cancer has developed in the bone marrow, so they're going to kill off all of that, and then they need a replacement for it. So that's where the donation comes in, and the stem cell from somebody else would be used. So it overlaps here for two reasons. The other thing I'm going to add is a TED Talk, and it's about a rare disease where your body ages really, really, really rapidly. And so the cell division is sort of out of control, not in a cancer type of way, but your cells are just going through this, all of them, in a rate which is abnormal and therefore makes you age incredibly quickly. Okay. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. There's not going to be any sort of extra homework or pieces to do. And I will get in touch with you to talk next week. All right. So I hope that, what am I doing here? You have a good weekend. All right. Take care, people.